After all this time. Why now?
The phone rang while I was still standing outside my grandfather's lawyer's office, clutching a folder that had just changed my life forever. The woman on the other end did not say hello. She did not ask how I was. Her voice came sharp and cold, like a knife dragged across glass. "You are not keeping that money, Sarah." For a moment, the entire world seemed to stop moving. Cars rolled past on the busy Seattle street. People hurried along the sidewalk. A distant ferry horn echoed across the harbor. Yet all I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat. I had not heard my mother's voice in nearly 30 years. Not since the day she abandoned me. Not since the day she disappeared from my life without looking back. And somehow, after all those years, the first thing she wanted was money. I slowly lowered myself onto a nearby bench. My fingers tightened around the folder in my lap. Only an hour earlier, I had learned that my grandfather had left me everything. Every property. Every investment. Every account. A fortune worth $7 million. At that moment, I should have felt lucky. Instead, a storm of fear and confusion began gathering inside my chest. My name is Sarah Bennett. I am 30 years old. And this nightmare started long before that phone call. According to the few people who still remembered, I was barely 1 year old when my parents decided they no longer wanted the responsibility of raising a child. Daniel Bennett and Monica Bennett packed their belongings, loaded their car, and drove away to start a new life. They left me behind. Not with a loving goodbye. Not with tears. Not with promises to return. They simply left. The person who opened his door and his heart to me was my grandfather, Walter Bennett. To the rest of the world, Walter was an aging retired shipbuilder who lived in a modest house near the waterfront. To me, he was everything. He became father, mother, teacher, protector, and best friend all at once. I still remember the rough texture of his calloused hands when he taught me how to hold a hammer. I remember the smell of sawdust filling the air as we repaired old wooden boats together behind the house. I remember winter evenings. When rain tapped against the windows while he read adventure novels aloud beside the fireplace. We never had luxury. We never had expensive vacations. But we had something far more valuable. We had each other. When I turned 14, I started working after school. I stocked shelves at grocery stores. I cleaned tables at small diners. I carried supplies at local marinas. Every dollar I earned went toward helping with bills. Grandfather always told me I did not have to work so hard. Yet I knew the truth. He had sacrificed too much for me already. As the years passed, our bond only grew stronger. People often underestimated him. They saw an old man living quietly near the docks. They never saw the intelligence behind his calm eyes. They never saw how carefully he observed everything around him. Sometimes I would catch him staring out toward the harbor with a thoughtful expression. When I asked what he was thinking about, he would simply smile. "One day you'll understand, Sarah." I never knew what he meant. Not then. Not until much later. Then, 6 weeks ago, everything changed. I found him peacefully asleep in his favorite chair facing the water. For a few beautiful seconds, I thought he was simply resting. Then I noticed the stillness. The silence. The absence of breath. My heart shattered. The funeral passed like a blur. Neighbors came. Old friends came. Former coworkers came. Everyone spoke about Walter's kindness. Everyone spoke about his generosity. But nobody knew the secret he had carried for decades. Including me. The morning after the funeral, I walked into Attorney Arthur Collins's office expecting to settle a few routine matters. Perhaps the house. Perhaps a small savings account. Nothing more. Instead, Arthur opened the will. As he began reading, his expression changed. Then mine did too. Shock washed over me. Disbelief followed. The grandfather who clipped coupons, repaired old furniture, and drove the same truck for 20 years had quietly built an empire. Properties. Investments. Business holdings. $7 million. Every single cent belonged to me. I sat frozen. Tears filled my eyes. Not because of the money. Because even after his death, Walter Bennett was still protecting the little girl everyone else had abandoned. Outside the office, the clouds drifted slowly across the Seattle sky. Inside my folder rested the future he had built for me. But somewhere far away, two people who had forgotten I existed were suddenly remembering they had a daughter. And they were already preparing to take everything away. The lawsuit arrived exactly 8 days after my mother's phone call. A courier handed me a thick certified envelope as I stepped onto the front porch. The moment I saw the legal markings across the package, a cold knot tightened in my stomach. Somehow, I already knew. They weren't coming back for me. They were coming back for the money. The harbor wind whipped across the yard as I stood there staring at the envelope. For several seconds, I couldn't bring myself to open it. Part of me still hoped I was wrong. Part of me still hoped there was a misunderstanding. Then I tore the package open. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. Petition contesting last will and testament. Daniel Bennett. Monica Bennett. My biological parents. The same people who had abandoned me nearly 30 years ago were officially challenging my grandfather's will. I walked back into the house in a daze. The silence felt heavier than ever. Every room still carried traces of Walter. His reading glasses remained on the coffee table. His favorite chair still faced the water. His old jacket still hung beside the door. For a moment, grief overwhelmed me all over again. They weren't only attacking my inheritance. They were attacking his memory. My eyes continued scanning the lawsuit. The accusations became worse with every page. According to their attorneys, I had manipulated an elderly man during the final years of his life. They claimed Walter had not been mentally competent when he signed the will. They claimed I had isolated him from family members. They claimed I had pressured him into leaving everything to me. I could hardly breathe. The lies were so outrageous they felt unreal. I had spent years caring for him. Driving him to medical appointments. Cooking meals. Managing medications. Helping him through surgeries. Sitting beside him during sleepless nights. Yet now strangers reading these documents would see me portrayed as a greedy predator. The injustice burned like fire inside my chest. That afternoon I drove to Arthur Collins's office. When I entered, he already looked exhausted. A stack of legal documents covered his desk. He motioned for me to sit down. They moved faster than I expected, he said quietly. I handed him the lawsuit. I don't understand. They disappeared for decades. How can they even think they have a chance? Arthur removed his glasses and leaned back. Greed makes people believe impossible things. He opened another file. There is something you need to know. My heart immediately began racing. Arthur slid several documents across the desk. These weren't financial records. They were charitable reports. Tax filings. Donation summaries. At first, I didn't understand why he was showing them to me. Then I saw my grandfather's signature. Again. And again. And again. For years, Walter had quietly funded educational programs for disadvantaged children. He had paid medical expenses for struggling families. He had supported housing programs for elderly veterans. The total amount donated over the years exceeded $1 million. Tears filled my eyes. The man who wore patched work boots and drove an aging truck had secretly changed hundreds of lives. Why didn't he ever tell me? I whispered. Arthur smiled sadly. Because he wasn't doing it for recognition. For several moments neither of us spoke. I suddenly understood something important. The inheritance was never about wealth. It was about responsibility. Walter had spent his entire life building something meaningful. Now that responsibility belonged to me. As I left the office, my phone buzzed. A message appeared from an unknown number. There was no greeting. No explanation. Only a photograph. My parents stood smiling in front of an expensive waterfront house somewhere in California. Below the image was a single sentence. "We deserve what is ours." I stared at the screen in disbelief. For the first time since receiving the lawsuit, my fear began transforming into something else. Anger. Cold. Focused. Determined. They thought I was still the helpless child they had abandoned. They thought I would panic. They thought I would surrender. They had no idea who Walter Bennett had raised. That evening I returned home and walked into his workshop behind the house. The scent of old wood and machine oil lingered in the air. Dust floated through beams of fading sunlight. I stood there looking at decades of tools, shelves, cabinets, and unfinished projects. Then something caught my attention. Near the back wall sat an old wooden chest I had never seen opened. A strange feeling settled over me. Walter had always kept certain things hidden for a reason. Slowly, I stepped toward the chest. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered that my grandfather had prepared for this moment long before any lawsuit arrived. And I was about to discover why. I stood motionless in the fading light of the workshop, staring at the old wooden chest tucked beneath a workbench. In all my years living with Walter, I had never seen him open it. Not once. The chest looked ordinary enough. Scratches covered the surface. Dust coated the lid. Time had darkened the wood until it nearly blended into the shadows around it. Yet something about it felt different. Important. My pulse quickened as I knelt beside it. The brass latch wasn't locked. I lifted the lid. The hinges groaned softly. Inside were dozens of neatly organized folders, journals, and envelopes tied together with faded blue ribbon. The smell of old paper drifted upward. Immediately, I recognized my grandfather's handwriting. Every label was written in the same careful script. Family. Legal. Personal. Sarah. My throat tightened. Slowly, I pulled out the folder with my name on it. Inside were photographs spanning nearly 3 decades. Pictures of birthday parties. School graduations. Christmas mornings. Family barbecues. Every important moment of my life had been preserved. Tears blurred my vision. Walter had documented everything. Every milestone. Every achievement. Every struggle. As though he knew someone might one day question whether I truly belonged in his life. As though he knew someone would eventually try to rewrite our story. 4 hours I sat on the workshop floor reading. The journals revealed pieces of my grandfather I had never fully known. His fears. His hopes. His heartbreak. Again and again, one theme appeared throughout the pages. He worried about me. Not because he doubted my strength. Because he feared the people who had abandoned me would one day return. The deeper I searched, the more unsettling the discoveries became. There were copies of letters he had mailed to Daniel and Monica over the years. Some begged them to visit. Some included photographs of me. Others simply asked if they wanted to know their daughter. Every single letter had been returned unopened. Many still carried bright postal stickers. Return to sender. Undeliverable. Refused. The words felt like fresh wounds. My parents hadn't merely disappeared. They had actively rejected every opportunity to reconnect. Every chance. Every invitation. Every attempt. Anger simmered beneath my grief. Then I found something unexpected. A name. Ethan Walker. The name appeared repeatedly throughout several journals. I immediately recognized it. Ethan had been my closest childhood friend. We had grown up only a few blocks apart. After high school, life had taken us in different directions, and we rarely spoke anymore. The next morning, I called him. To my surprise, he answered immediately. 2 hours later, we sat together inside a small waterfront cafe overlooking Elliott Bay. Ethan listened carefully as I explained everything. The inheritance. The lawsuit. The accusations. The hidden chest. His expression darkened with every detail. Finally, he leaned forward. Sarah, there is something I've never told you. A chill ran through me. What is it? He hesitated. Then he spoke quietly. When we were teenagers, your grandfather came to my father's office several times. My father's office? My dad handled document storage and public records back then. I stared at him. What kind of documents? Ethan looked directly into my eyes. Legal records involving your parents. My heartbeat accelerated. What records? I don't know exactly. Dad never discussed clients. But I remember your grandfather being very upset. Whatever happened, he was preparing for something. That single sentence changed everything. Preparing for something. The words echoed inside my mind all afternoon. That evening, I returned to the workshop with renewed determination. There had to be more. Walter never did anything without a reason. I carefully examined every shelf, cabinet, and drawer. Hours passed. Darkness settled outside. Then I noticed something unusual. Behind a row of toolboxes sat a section of wall that looked newer than the surrounding wood. My pulse surged. I moved the boxes aside. The panel shifted slightly beneath my hand. It wasn't part of the wall. It was a hidden compartment. Breathing hard, I pulled it open. Inside rested a single large envelope sealed with red wax. Unlike the other documents, this one carried a warning written in bold black ink. The handwriting was unmistakably Walter's. For Sarah. Open only if Daniel and Monica ever challenge my final wishes. My entire body went still. The workshop suddenly felt silent. Too silent. For several long seconds, I simply stared at the envelope. Walter had known. Years ago. Maybe decades ago. He had known this day would come. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal. As the first page unfolded in my hands, the color drained from my face. The truth inside was far bigger than a lawsuit. Far bigger than an inheritance. And powerful enough to destroy everything my parents were trying to build. For a long moment, I could do nothing except stare at the documents spread across my grandfather's workbench. My hands trembled. My breathing became shallow. Every page revealed another layer of deception. Another secret. Another betrayal. The first document was a notarized agreement signed nearly 30 years earlier. The signatures were unmistakable. Daniel Bennett. Monica Bennett. My parents. I read the pages once. Then again. Then a third time. The meaning never changed. When I was barely 1 year old, my parents had voluntarily surrendered their parental rights. Completely. Permanently. Legally. But that wasn't the shocking part. Attached to the agreement were financial records. Bank transfers. Receipts. Signed acknowledgements. My grandfather had paid them a substantial sum of money as part of the arrangement. The documents described it as relocation assistance. A fresh start. An opportunity to build a better future. Walter had hoped the money would help them stabilize their lives. Instead, they had taken the money and disappeared. The room felt colder with every page I turned. My grandfather hadn't stolen me from them. He hadn't manipulated them. He hadn't forced them away. They had chosen to leave. Worse still, they had been compensated for doing so. I sat down heavily in Walter's old chair. For years I had secretly wondered whether there was something wrong with me. Something unlovable. Something broken. Children abandoned by their parents often ask themselves the same question. Why wasn't I enough? Now I finally had my answer. Their decision had never been about me. It had been about themselves. Tears rolled silently down my cheeks. Not tears of sadness. Tears of release. A burden I had carried my entire life was finally lifting. The next morning, I brought everything to Arthur Collins. His eyes widened as he reviewed the evidence. For nearly an hour, he said very little. Page after page disappeared into neat stacks across his desk. Finally, he removed his glasses. "This changes everything." I nodded. "I thought so too." "No, Sarah. You don't understand." His voice carried an intensity one had never heard before. "This doesn't simply weaken their case." He tapped the documents. "It destroys it." For the first time in weeks, a small spark of hope appeared inside me. Arthur immediately assembled a legal team. Every document was authenticated. Every signature verified. Every financial record traced. The evidence proved beyond doubt that my parents had willingly severed their parental relationship decades earlier. Yet while we were preparing our defense, Daniel and Monica were busy creating a completely different story. The local media soon picked up the lawsuit. Several articles appeared online. Most repeated the same narrative. Elderly grandfather manipulated. Heartbroken parents excluded. Greedy granddaughter receives massive fortune. Reading those headlines felt like swallowing poison. Strangers who knew nothing about my life flooded social media with opinions. Some called me selfish. Others called me dishonest. A few even suggested I share the inheritance. None of them knew the truth. One evening, while scrolling through another article, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed a name I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, I answered. An elderly man's voice spoke softly. "Are you Sarah Bennett?" "Yes." "My name is Thomas Green." The name meant nothing to me. Then he continued. "I believe your grandfather would want us to talk." Immediately, I sat upright. Thomas explained that he had worked as a notary public many years earlier. More importantly, he had personally witnessed the signing of the parental rights agreement. Every word he spoke reinforced what the documents already proved. But his final statement changed everything. There was another witness present that day. My heart skipped. "Who?" "Your grandfather's attorney at the time." I grabbed a pen. "What was his name?" Thomas gave me the answer. Arthur located the retired attorney within 24 hours. Despite his age, his memory remained remarkably clear. After reviewing the documents, he agreed to testify. The momentum of the case shifted almost overnight. For the first time, Daniel and Monica were no longer controlling the narrative. The truth was beginning to surface. Still, I couldn't shake a strange feeling. Walter had been too careful. Too prepared. Too deliberate. As though he had anticipated every move they might make. Late one evening, Arthur called with an update. His voice sounded unusually confident. "Sarah, the hearing is scheduled for next week." I stared out at the dark waters beyond the harbor. "Do you think we'll win?" There was a brief silence. Then Arthur answered. "No." My stomach dropped. Before panic could take hold, he continued. "I think they're about to lose in ways they never imagined." For the first time since this nightmare began, I smiled. Across the country, my parents still believed they were walking toward a fortune. What they didn't realize was that every step they took was leading them straight into a trap my grandfather had set decades earlier. And in just a few days, the entire courtroom would see exactly who they really were. The courtroom was already crowded when I arrived that morning. Reporters filled several rows. Curious spectators whispered among themselves. Attorneys shuffled stacks of documents across polished tables. The atmosphere felt heavy. Electric. Like the moments before a violent storm. I sat beside Arthur Collins and quietly folded my hands in my lap. Across the room, Daniel and Monica Bennett looked remarkably confident. My mother wore an expensive designer suit. My father leaned comfortably in his chair with a smug smile stretched across his face. To anyone watching, they appeared completely certain of victory. For a brief moment, our eyes met. My mother smirked. The same cold expression I had seen in the photograph she sent weeks earlier. The same expression that once made a little girl wonder why she had never been loved. But that little girl was gone. Walter Bennett had made sure of that. The judge entered. The room immediately fell silent. The hearing began. Daniel and Monica's attorney stood first. For nearly an hour, he presented their version of events. According to him, I was an opportunistic granddaughter who had manipulated an elderly man during the final years of his life. According to him, Walter had been isolated from his family. According to him, the inheritance should naturally belong to his surviving relatives. The performance was polished. Emotional. Convincing. Several people in the audience nodded along. I remained perfectly still. Arthur had warned me not to react. So I didn't. Finally, the judge turned toward our table. Mr. Collins. Arthur stood. Calm. Composed. Prepared. Unlike the dramatic presentation before him, Arthur spoke quietly. Methodically. Fact by fact. Evidence by evidence. He submitted the parental rights agreement. The financial records. The notarized statements. The witness testimony. The courtroom grew noticeably quieter with every document added to the record. The judge adjusted his glasses several times. His expression gradually changed. Confusion became concern. Concern became disbelief. Then came the moment everything shifted. Thomas Green took the witness stand. Despite his advanced age, his voice remained steady. He confirmed the authenticity of the agreement. He described watching Daniel and Monica voluntarily sign away their parental rights nearly 30 years earlier. The silence in the courtroom became absolute. My mother's confidence visibly cracked. My father stopped smiling. Then the retired attorney testified. His testimony matched every detail. Every date. Every signature. Every event. One by one, the lies collapsed. But Arthur wasn't finished. Not even close. He approached the bench carrying the final envelope Walter had prepared. The envelope that had waited decades for this exact day. The judge carefully reviewed its contents. Minutes passed. No one spoke. No one moved. Then the judge slowly lowered the documents. His eyes locked onto Daniel and Monica. The disappointment on his face was unmistakable. The affidavit revealed everything. Walter had anticipated their return years earlier. He documented their abandonment. Their refusal to communicate. Their rejection of every attempt to reconnect. Most devastating of all, he recorded evidence proving they had accepted money in exchange for permanently surrendering their parental responsibilities. The courtroom erupted with shocked whispers. The judge immediately restored order. Then he delivered his ruling. The lawsuit was dismissed in its entirety. Every claim rejected. Every argument denied. Daniel and Monica possessed no legal claim to the estate. None. Not now. Not ever. The gavel struck. Sharp. Final. Powerful. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then reality arrived all at once. My mother began crying. Not from remorse. From defeat. My father's face turned pale. The confident man who entered the courtroom that morning looked completely broken. The judge wasn't finished. Because evidence submitted during the proceedings suggested financial misrepresentations and false statements, he referred portions of the case for further investigation. The consequences were only beginning. As reporters rushed toward the exits, Daniel and Monica quietly slipped away through a side door. No victory. No fortune. No sympathy. Nothing. Just the weight of their own choices. Later that evening, I returned home alone. The harbor was calm. Golden sunlight danced across the water. For the first time in months, I felt peace. Not because I had inherited $7 million. Because I had finally inherited the truth. I walked into Walter's workshop and sat in his old chair. The room felt different now. Lighter. Almost as if a burden had finally been lifted. Over the following year, I used part of the inheritance to establish programs supporting abandoned children, struggling grandparents, and educational scholarships for young people facing difficult circumstances. The same kindness Walter had quietly shared with the world would continue long after both of us were gone. Sometimes people ask whether I ever forgave my parents. The answer is simple. Forgiveness is not pretending the past never happened. Forgiveness is refusing to let the past control your future. Daniel and Monica gave me life. But Walter Bennett gave me everything else. He taught me that family is not defined by blood. Family is defined by sacrifice. By loyalty. By love. And on the day the courtroom finally exposed the truth, I realized something beautiful. The little girl left behind had never been abandoned at all. She had been chosen. Chosen by the one person whose love never carried a price. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have forgiven them after everything they did? And if you enjoy stories of justice, resilience, and unexpected payback, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more unforgettable stories here on Still Waters Payback.